Last week, we reported the bombshell news that Robert Wagner has been named a...
The Natalie Wood mystery finally solved and isn't good. For more than 4 decades, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses has been resting at the bottom of an unanswered question. Natalie Wood didn't die in a hospital bed or in a car crash or from illness. She vanished from a yacht in the middle of the night. In cold water, she had feared her entire life, and by morning she was gone. No one has ever been charged. No one has ever been formally accused in a court of law. And yet, 60 years after she first stepped in front of a camera as a small child, the woman who charmed audiences in Miracle on 34th Street and broke hearts in Splendor in the Grass is remembered today almost as much for the mystery of her final night as for the brilliance of her career. What actually happened aboard the Splendor on November 28, 1981? Why did investigators wait nearly 4 hours before calling the Coast Guard? Why did a woman on a nearby boat report hearing screams for help that were never followed up on for decades? And why, even after the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case, brought in new witnesses, and named her husband a person of interest, has the truth never fully surfaced? This is the story of Natalie Wood's life, her death, and the questions that refuse to go away. Natalie Wood was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco, the daughter of Russian immigrants Nikolai and Maria Zakharenko. Her mother Maria was the driving force behind her daughter's career from the very beginning, pushing 4-year-old Natalie into acting with a determination that bordered on obsession. Hollywood lore holds that Maria was so intent on getting real emotion out of her daughter on set that she once destroyed a butterfly in front of the child simply to provoke tears for the camera. Whether or not every detail of that story has been told exactly as it happened, it captures something true about Natalie's childhood. It was not gentle, and it was not really hers. It belonged to her mother's ambitions. Despite that difficult start, Natalie's talent was undeniable. At age 8, she became a household name playing the skeptical little girl in Miracle on 34th Street, a role that proved she could hold her own opposite adult actors and carry real emotional weight on screen. As she grew older, she fought to be seen as more than a child star, and she succeeded spectacularly. Her performance in Rebel Without a Cause alongside James Dean, playing a lonely, troubled teenager, earned her an Academy Award nomination at just 17 years old. She followed that with 2 more roles that showcased her range and depth: West Side Story, where she played Maria, and Splendor in the Grass, where she portrayed a young woman unraveling under heartbreak and mental illness. By her early 20s, Natalie Wood was one of the most respected and sought-after actresses in the world, with 3 Oscar nominations to her name. Off-screen, her personal life was just as dramatic as anything she played on camera. As a young girl, she reportedly told her mother that she would one day marry the actor Robert Wagner after seeing his photograph. Years later, that prediction came true. Natalie began dating Wagner at 18, and on December 28, 1957, the two were married in a glamorous Scottsdale, Arizona ceremony that the press ate up. They were, for a time, considered one of Hollywood's golden couples. But the marriage struggled under the weight of an uneven balance of fame. By the early 1960s, Natalie was the far bigger star, with Oscar nominations and major roles, while Wagner was viewed mostly as a television actor. According to Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, tension in the marriage came to a head when Natalie discovered Wagner in a compromising situation with another man in their own home, a scandal that would have been explosive in the conservative climate of 1962 Hollywood. The couple separated that June and officially divorced in April 1962. The years that followed were turbulent for Natalie romantically. She had an intense, on-and-off relationship with Warren Beatty, then married British producer Richard Gregson in 1969, with whom she had her first daughter, Natasha, in 1970. That marriage also collapsed after Natalie discovered Gregson had been having an affair with her own secretary. Then, in a twist that surprised even those closest to her, Natalie reconnected with Robert Wagner in January 1972, nearly a decade after their divorce. Both were single again, and within months they had rekindled their relationship. They remarried in a quiet ceremony aboard a yacht off Malibu in July 1972. Wagner became a stepfather to Natasha, and in 1970 the couple welcomed a second daughter, Courtney, together. To the public, it looked like a storybook reunion. To those closer to the couple, old patterns of jealousy and control reportedly resurfaced, particularly around Natalie's career and her relationships with male co-stars. There was one deeply personal detail about Natalie that made the events of November 1981 all the more haunting. She was terrified of dark water. As a child, she had been told that a psychic once predicted she would die by drowning, and that prophecy stuck with her for the rest of her life. She avoided swimming, disliked boats, and by most accounts of people who knew her, she would never have willingly gone out onto open water alone at night. That fear is part of why, when she died the way she did, so many people who knew her simply couldn't accept the official explanation. The weekend that ended Natalie Wood's life began as an ordinary break during the filming of her movie Brainstorm. On Thanksgiving weekend of 1981, Natalie, Robert Wagner, her Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, set out on the Splendor for Catalina Island. Rough weather pushed them from their original mooring near Avalon to the quieter, more secluded harbor at Two Harbors. That Saturday night, the group went ashore for dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef, a well-known restaurant on the island. By multiple accounts from staff and other diners, the group was drinking heavily, and tension between Wagner and Walken was obvious. Their disagreement reportedly centered on Natalie's career, with Walken encouraging her to keep pursuing independent projects and Wagner wanting her to focus more on their marriage and family. That argument didn't stay at the dinner table. According to Dennis Davern, it followed them back onto the boat and escalated further, to the point that Wagner later admitted he smashed a wine bottle on a table in anger. What happened after that is where the official story and the accounts of others begin to diverge sharply, and where the case has remained stuck for more than 40 years. Wagner has said that Natalie went to bed and that when he checked on her later, she was simply gone. Davern has told a different story publicly for years, claiming that Wagner was aware Natalie was missing far earlier than he let on, and that he told Davern not to turn on the yacht searchlights, not to alert nearby boats, and not to call the Coast Guard right away. In his 2009 book, written with journalist Marty Rulli, Davern said he came to believe Wagner bore responsibility for what happened to Natalie, and he has since told multiple news outlets, including NBC's Today Show, that he regretted not telling the full truth during the original 1981 investigation. Whatever the reason for the delay, the numbers are stark. The Coast Guard was not notified until around 3:30 in the morning, roughly 4 hours after Natalie was last seen. In cold ocean water, survival odds fall dramatically within minutes, not hours. Meanwhile, on a nearby boat anchored close to the Splendor that night, a couple named Marilyn Wayne and John Payne reported hearing something disturbing, a woman's voice calling out from the water for help, pleading repeatedly to be saved, followed by a man's voice responding dismissively, and then silence. Wayne has said publicly for years that she tried to report what she heard, but for a long time nobody with the authority to investigate seriously followed up. When detectives reopened the case decades later, her account, along with several other new witness statements gathered through the 2010s, became part of what the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department described as evidence of a new and different sequence of events than the one originally given by the men on the boat. Natalie's body was found the next morning, floating about a mile from the Splendor. She was wearing a flannel nightgown, a red down jacket, and socks. The yacht's small rubber dinghy was found beached nearby, its line still tied. That single detail struck many people, then and now, as deeply strange. The original theory was that Natalie had gone out to secure the dinghy, which was banging against the yacht in the rough water, slipped, and fell in. But if the dinghy's lines were still fastened, that theory falls apart. And even setting that detail aside, the idea that a woman famously afraid of dark water would head out alone, at night, in freezing conditions, wearing only a nightgown, socks, and a jacket, after a night of heavy drinking, struck investigators themselves as difficult to believe. Lieutenant John Corina of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department later said publicly that the idea of Natalie trying to board a dinghy alone in the middle of the night in her pajamas simply didn't make sense to him. The original autopsy, conducted by famed Los Angeles County coroner Dr. Thomas Noguchi, ruled the death an accidental drowning. Natalie's blood alcohol level was measured at 0.14%, well above the legal driving limit, and she also had traces of a motion sickness medication and a mild painkiller in her system, which would have compounded the effects of the alcohol and likely impaired her coordination. But the autopsy also documented a number of bruises on her arms, legs, and face, along with an abrasion on her cheek, injuries that some forensic experts have said over the years look less consistent with a simple accidental fall and more consistent with some kind of physical struggle. Noguchi himself later acknowledged there were unresolved questions about the case. It took 30 years, but in 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially reopened the investigation, citing new witnesses who had come forward. A year later, the coroner's office formally amended Natalie's death certificate, changing the official cause of death from a simple accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors, a change that reflected the growing acknowledgement that the full story had never actually been told. The most significant development came in February 2018, when Sheriff's Department investigators spoke publicly for the first time about the state of their reopened case in an interview with CBS's 48 Hours. Lieutenant John Corina told correspondent Aaron Moriarty that after 6 years of renewed investigation, Robert Wagner had become more of a person of interest, explaining that detectives now understood he had been the last person with Natalie before she disappeared, and that his account of events did not line up with what other witnesses had described. Detective Ralph Hernandez went further, telling 48 Hours that the bruising documented in Natalie's autopsy made her look, in his words, like the victim of an assault. Importantly, though, investigators were careful with their language. They stopped short of calling Wagner a suspect, and they acknowledged they had not been able to prove the death was a homicide, just as they had not been able to prove it was a simple accident. As Detective Hernandez put it at the time, the fundamental problem is that nobody actually knows how Natalie ended up in the water in the first place. Wagner, for his part, has consistently refused to sit down for a new interview with investigators despite repeated attempts, including detectives traveling to Aspen, Colorado, where he lives, to try to speak with him directly. He has always denied any wrongdoing and has said publicly that the loss of Natalie devastated him. The Sheriff's Department has since clarified that the case remains open and classified as a suspicious death investigation, not a closed case and not a declared homicide. According to a statement the department gave to E! News after the 48 Hours report aired, new witnesses described hearing yelling and the sound of things being knocked over coming from Wagner and Natalie's stateroom that night, followed by the sound of a man and a woman arguing on the back of the boat, voices that witnesses believed belonged to Wagner and Natalie. Detectives were careful to note that this did not amount to enough evidence to make an arrest. As one department statement put it bluntly, they simply did not have enough at that point to bring charges. That distinction matters. A person of interest is not the same as a suspect, and a suspect is not the same as someone charged with a crime. As of the most recent public statements from Los Angeles County authorities, Robert Wagner has never been formally accused of any crime in connection with his wife's death, and the case, while still technically open, has not produced an arrest in the years since 2018. There's another layer to Natalie Wood's story that has nothing to do with the night she died, but that many people believe helps explain the fear and instability that shaped so much of her adult life. In 2021, Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, published a memoir called Little Sister: My Investigation into the Mysterious Death of Natalie Wood. In it, she made a stunning claim that in the summer of 1955, when Natalie was just 16 years old, their mother arranged a meeting between Natalie and Kirk Douglas, then one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, at the Chateau Marmont Hotel in Los Angeles. According to Lana, their mother believed the connection could open doors for Natalie's career. What allegedly happened that night, according to Lana's account, was not a career opportunity, but a sexual assault. Lana wrote that Natalie came back to the car disheveled, shaken, and clearly distressed, and that years later, as adults, Natalie finally told her what had happened, saying simply, "He hurt me, Lana." Lana said their mother's response at the time was to tell Natalie to stay quiet, warning that speaking out would destroy both of their careers, a reflection of how the Hollywood studio system of that era often protected powerful men at the expense of the young women around them. Kirk Douglas died in 2020, a year before the book's publication, and his family did not directly dispute the allegation when asked for comment, issuing only a brief statement wishing peace to both Douglas and Wood. It's worth being clear about what this is, a claim made by Natalie's sister, told secondhand and posthumously, that has never been independently corroborated through legal proceedings, since Douglas passed away before the book's release and was never questioned about the allegation. Whether or not every detail matches exactly what happened in that hotel room nearly 70 years ago, the claim itself speaks to a broader, well-documented truth about the era. Young actresses in the studio system frequently had little power to protect themselves from older, more influential men, and even less power to speak out if something happened. Natalie's daughter, Natasha Gregson Wagner, has taken a very different position than her aunt Lana on much of this. In 2020, she produced an HBO documentary called Natalie Wood, What Remains Behind, which offered her own deeply personal reflections on her mother's life and death. In it, Natasha spoke about her complicated feelings toward Robert Wagner, the man who raised her after her biological father left, describing him as a loving and devoted stepfather who was there for her during the hardest moments of her life. At the same time, she has acknowledged publicly how difficult it is to hold two seemingly contradictory truths at once: the caring father figure she grew up with, and the fact that same man has spent years as a person of interest in an investigation into her mother's death that has never been resolved. Natasha's documentary was notably critical of Lana Wood's public claims over the years, with people close to the family suggesting in interviews that Lana has, at times, leaned into sensational theories about the case. Lana, for her part, has been unambiguous in interviews, telling the New York Post plainly that she believes Wagner was responsible for her sister's death, saying she doesn't believe it was planned, but that she is certain, in her words, that he did it. So, where does that leave us, more than 40 years after Natalie Wood disappeared from the deck of the Splendor? The honest answer is that the case remains legally unsolved. No one has been arrested. No one has been charged. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has stated clearly that they have not been able to prove this was a murder, and they have equally been unable to prove it was simply an accident. What has changed since 1981 is not a conviction, but a shift in the official record and in public understanding, from a tidy story about a tragic slip into the water to an acknowledgement, even by the original investigators, that there are more questions here than answers. The amended death certificate, the new witness statements, the persistent inconsistencies in the accounts given by the men who were on that boat, and the decades of unresolved suspicion around a man who has never agreed to a full, formal interview with the detectives investigating his wife's death. All of that adds up to something far messier and more troubling than the neat, tragic accident headline that ran in newspapers the week Natalie Wood died. What we're left with is a portrait of a woman who spent her entire life being shaped and controlled by other people. First by an ambitious mother who pushed her into stardom as a small child. Then by a studio system that allegedly allowed a powerful man to hurt her as a teenager and told her to stay silent about it. And finally by a marriage that friends and family have long described as loving on the surface, but strained by jealousy and control underneath. She spent her life terrified of dark water because of a childhood prophecy, and she died in it anyway, on a boat, in the dark, after an argument, under circumstances that still don't add up more than 4 decades later. Whether the answer to what really happened that November night will ever be known for certain remains an open question. For now, what's left is a case file that officially remains open, a family split between very different beliefs about what happened, and the memory of one of Hollywood's most talented actresses, whose life ended in a mystery that the truth, whatever it ultimately is, still hasn't been allowed to fully surface.